Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. My name is Jesse Martineau, and this episode is a bit different for the podcast because recently I came across an article, actually that David Ferment posted, and I read the article and it immediately got my attention. The writer wrote things that connected with me in a way that hasn't happened to me in quite some time. So I was super impressed. Actually, the name of the article is "Where Do We Fit? Too American to be French Canadian and Too French Canadian to be American." And I am legitimately very excited to talk with the author of that piece, Carolyn Castonguay. Welcome to the French Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am such a big fan of this podcast, and I've been wanting to, I've been listening in, with a bunch of the segments,
that.
and yeah, of course.
Cool. That's awesome.
And so yeah, just super happy to be here. Thank you.
Very cool. Now, I'll just start with your story. Where are you from?
So I was born in Bristol, Connecticut. And then just to give like a very brief overview, when I was around 4, I moved to Avon. So that's where I am currently. My grandparents, they all moved to Bristol, Connecticut around, I want to say the 1950s, around then.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Bristol has been known as a little Canada, so to speak, within Connecticut. It has one of the highest French Canadian populations of any town there.
Yeah, no, so were all your grandparents born?
Yeah, so to be more specific, I guess, my maternal grandmother was born in Grand Falls, Canada. And then my maternal grandfather was born in Van Buren, Maine. And on my father's side, so my maternal grandfather was born, his timeline's a bit messier, but I want to say he was born in Canada, and but right near the border as well. And then my maternal grandmother was born in Drummond. At the time, what I was told is that the border between Canada and northern Maine and Van Buren specifically, it was extremely fluid, which is actually something Sarah Poulin talks about in her TED Talk. I watched your, you guys posted it on Facebook. Yeah. And she talks about a lot of border fluidity. And so that was something I could really relate to. My grandparents would tell me that essentially the river between the two countries would just freeze in the wintertime and then you would just cross it. And so they, despite that, despite 2 of my grandparents being born in the States, I think, because I'm really not sure about my paternal grandfather, I think that they all identified really as Canadian.
Gotcha.
Because it wasn't that firm as to, there was a lot of fluidity there, basically, is my point.
I think that whole area, just as an aside, is super interesting. Never been to the St. John Valley at all, but one of the people who works at the Franco-American Center at the University of Maine, I talk to all the time. Super. Yeah. She runs the forum for them. She's awesome. Her family's from that area, and like you were saying, it's completely like they just basically ignore the freaking border, which was not, it's like one giant community, just happens to be on both sides of the border, which was fine until crazy COVID world, because now she's on one side and she has children and her parents on the other, and she hasn't seen them in forever because they can't cross the border.
Yeah, I've heard of problems with dual citizens. We're family friends with a couple that are dual citizens, and they have a residence in Florida, and that's when COVID kicked off, that's where they were kind of located. That was home base for them for the most part.
Yeah.
And now they're not able to get back, and they're stuck here in the States, which is, I can imagine, extremely stressful.
So that's cool. So you grew up in the Bristol area. Now I'm curious, because your grandparents came down, I guess, towards the tail end of what we normally considered.
Yes. Yeah. Much
later. Immigration pattern.
Right.
I gotta be honest with you, the only French town I think of, when I don't know Connecticut very well, but I've heard Bristol. I knew Bristol was a French town. Yep. What is there now? Are there French organizations? Are there French social groups? What does the Franco-American scene look like in Bristol right now?
If I'm frank, and this is from what I can tell,
Sure.
I don't think that there's really any culture there anymore. When Bristol was founded, it was kind of sectioned off into, I want to say, the French Canadian section, a Polish section, and then an Italian section. And I may or may not be forgetting
Sure.
two others.
Yep.
But that was really kind of it. And everybody there was like these little mini ecosystems within Bristol, and they, kind of existed in harmony, more or less. And I know that in Bristol now, I think there is there may be like a Polish or an Italian cultural center, a club. I don't think there's a French Canadian one, as far as I know.
Interesting.
Yeah. So just to give a bit more background, I suppose. So I moved to Avon, as I said, when I was 4. Growing up, I really didn't know anything about my heritage at all. I was pretty oblivious, I would say. But when I was in 4th grade, there was this really famous school project that a lot of kids ended up really enjoying, and it was a family tree project. And I'd kind of heard rumors about it, and I was like, oh, this is actually one project I think I'd enjoy. So the day finally comes, the teacher tells everybody, hey, we're gonna do a family tree project, so go home and talk to your families and try to figure out as much as you can. So that day I marched home with my mom and dad, and I was like, hand on hip, and I was like, all right, what are we? What are we all about?
That's fun.
And so my mom, I remember the look she gave me. She's like, we're French Canadian. And I was like, okay, and she said, that's it. And I was like, what do you mean that's it? That's it? That's everything? We're just French Canadian? That's impossible. Because that day, all the students had been buzzing about it. And they were saying, some of them already had an understanding of their background.
Right.
And I would hear that, oh, I'm Swedish and I'm Italian and I'm Polish and I'm this and I'm that. And, I think the really cool thing about America is that it is this cultural melting pot in a way. I mean, that you don't find a lot of countries that are, kind of founded on that idea. It's kind of like our social fabric. So I was kind of expecting something similar. And I was like, I'd like to call a lot of places home in a sense, and draw from a lot of different places. So when my mom said that, that's it.
You're
French Canadian.
That's the show.
That's it. And oh my gosh, I was crestfallen. And I was so down in the dumps about it. I was just, oh, no way, this can't be real. And growing up, we did have some elements of French Canadian culture. Like my mom every year makes a twitche at, Christmas time.
Absolutely.
And my grandmother has her own recipe. And then my great grandmother has her own recipe. They all have their own flair, their own
That's awesome.
thing to it, their own special take. I mean, maple syrup has always been a big part, it runs through my veins,
There you go.
Joking aside though,
Sure.
That was kind of the extent of it, aside from maybe every once in a while my grandparents would speak French to my parents. Specifically, it'd be, I would say, my maternal grandmother to my mother.
Gotcha.
Because my mother understands French, but she can't speak it. At least she deeply struggles in speaking it. Whereas my maternal grandmother has no problem. And unfortunately, my maternal grandfather has passed, but he did speak French very well. And then on my father's side, unfortunately, my paternal grandmother now has dementia and Alzheimer's. Although what's been really interesting about that, just to go down a rabbit hole for a quick minute, is that French was her very first language. And as the dementia began to advance, she started forgetting more and more of her English, and she started speaking French more. Part of the reason why I wanted to learn French was because I know my parents would not be able to communicate with her. And should something happen to her husband, I would kind of be the only one. So I needed to learn quickly, and I really needed to have some mastery of the language, so that way we could still maybe try to decipher what she's trying to say or what she needs. So that was very important to me. That was
that's huge.
Yeah. I felt a lot of personal responsibility to learn the language so as to, help her. That aside, my paternal grandfather does still speak French, but they always kept it as a very secret language between, between them. So my father doesn't understand any of it, and he's tried.
He didn't grow up with it in the house at all? They didn't speak it in
Well, they would speak to each other, but he would not be able to understand one word of it.
Gotcha.
His grandparents didn't speak any English at all. So when he would go visit up north in Canada,
Sure.
they would basically play charades with each other,
Yeah.
which is kind of tragic, actually, if you think about it. I can't imagine what that would feel like and the sense of loss.
Yeah. I didn't have that with a grandparent, but I went back, like, it was like my first real time going up, like, as an adult. I had done the 18-year-old act like an idiot in Montreal thing, but I went up when I was older with my dad and my uncle, and we ran into some relatives they hadn't seen, like, seriously, like 40 years, and they didn't speak any English at all.
Wow.
So it was kind of like me standing there awkwardly as he's having a conversation. But I can't even imagine if that's a grandparent. That's got to be tough.
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot. And I thought about it a lot when I was writing my paper as well. And, if I had to say there's any silver lining about my situation, it's that I understand there's a lot of anti-French speaking sentiment in Canada, just depending on where you are. And I feel like being an English speaker, I'm in a wonderful position to champion the learning of French and practicing French. And I've experienced firsthand, and my parents as well, that sense of loss.
Yeah.
And we can really speak to that, I think. And so many French Canadians can in general. Being a native English speaker, I'm just better equipped to kind of support the learning of French and advocating for that, because I do think that is so valuable.
So we should probably talk about the article.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Before I get to the article itself, actually, I'm curious, what's your reaction to the fact that it has absolutely blown up? The idea, as you're putting this together, that every Franco-American in New England is going to read this thing.
I had no idea. Funny thing about this. So I was in my senior year of college at Mount Holyoke, and I was in this class called The American Essay. And it's very straightforward. It just was a class about essays and America. That was it. That was the whole essence of it. But very early on, we got our first assignment, and that was prior to actually getting the assignment. We were studying different themes in American essays. So one of the big themes that a lot of people tend to pick up on is calling to your ancestors for guidance or help or trying to connect with them. So that was something that really struck a chord with me.
Sure.
And around that time, I had picked up David Vermette's book and I had been reading it. And it was really a powerful book. And it was served as this catalyst to for me to voice my own story. I think that kind of gave me some courage, a little bit of chutzpah. So when the assignment came around, I knew, like, I felt like it's time, and I felt ready, and I felt like I just want to talk about my own story. And my original essay was actually a bit different to the one you read on Bangor Daily News. My original essay had a very different title. That was the title they had given it.
Gotcha.
Mine was a bit more obscure, but I felt my background, my choice of reasoning was interesting. So I had originally labeled it a solitary birch, which sounds a bit obscure, a bit odd. I get that. And what does a birch tree have to do with being French Canadian? So at the end of my essay, and I don't know if any of your listeners have read it, but at the end I would
imagine quite a few have. Yeah.
Right. I'm basically talking about how I'm walking through the forest and it's winter. So there's a lot of, woodland imagery. And I actually, where I live, it's surrounded by forest. And I was looking outside, I was writing my essay and thinking about my backyard at home. It's this whole forest of oak and maple and pine, but there's just one birch tree in the back.
That's cool.
One lone birch tree. And I kind of thought about that. And I felt I had so much in common with that stupid tree.
With the
because
birch.
I felt like the sole French speaker in this vast world, this New England community that, I was the only one that spoke French. And it felt very isolating. But also I thought about how a birch tree has two tones, it has the white and then it has like streaks of, brown and gray. And, it's two things. It's not just, one solid color. And I thought about how that was a lot like me. It was emblematic of me and how I'm not just American. I'm not just French Canadian. I am a combination of the two. And then I also later found out conveniently that the birch tree is the provincial tree of Quebec. And so I felt, wow, like this was a sheer coincidence. Like it's the perfect title. This is great. So I just thought that was like a little interesting tidbit. Yeah, so my original essay was a bit longer, had some variation, but overall, I'm very proud of my work. Although when I had written it, I'm very self-critical by nature. And, I felt, after writing it, I felt for once kind of satisfied with something I'd done. I felt
That's
like
awesome.
This is like a warm, fuzzy kind of thing. And, I felt good. And, my dad, as I've gotten older, has gotten more and more into genealogy. And so I felt, maybe he would appreciate this. And I sent it to him. That essay would have never been published if it were not for my father. He went behind my back and he mailed it to the Bangor Metro magazine. Originally, he tried to get it just into the newspaper, the local newspaper, but they read it and they liked it so much they wanted it in the magazine.
That's awesome.
I was totally honored. And,
good job, Dad.
Yeah, right, exactly. So he's my number one fan. And I just
That's very cool. It's all of our benefit that he did. That's very awesome. I like the thing about the birch, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Also, New Hampshire State.
Right.
With birch, there you go. I had no idea it was Quebec. So now that's it.
Yeah.
All right. So your article, your essay, begins with the words, quotes, "Last year when I studied abroad in France." So I got to hear the story. What is this trip about? Who was it with? Where'd you stay? How'd it come about? Why'd you do it?
Of course, yeah.
Sure.
So I do want to go back in time just a little bit.
Sure.
So when I first started learning French, I was in middle school. And at the time, I just want to preface this by saying that I figured in middle school, hey, I'm taking French. I'm finally going to be able to understand my family. I can actually like listen into these secret conversations, these secret worlds. And I'll kind of have a better sense of like what's going on. And I had no idea that there were different accents and basically dialects, I'm tempted to say. I had no idea.
Sure.
So fast forward, I do the same in high school. I'm still learning French. I have a different teacher nearly every single year. So my accent now is it's totally bizarre.
It's a mix.
It is very mixed, and I sound Eastern European.
Interesting.
Problem areas with my R's and my OU sound, which is typical of Americans. But
absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, so I entered college, and I actually wanted to go into animation because I've always just been really creative. It was a life dream of mine to study abroad.
Sure.
I had always wanted to do that, and I also I did travel to Paris for like about 2 weeks when I was in high school on a trip there. And so I'd gotten a little exposure to France and I really loved it. I went to the Loire Valley and Paris and it's lovely. It was great.
Sure.
So, I wanted to study abroad because I felt like I would love to go back. I'd love to practice my French more. And also, I do mention this in my essay a bit, that my family really upheld France to this really incredible but unrealistic standard, and we really idolized it. So I kind of viewed it as a homecoming. So after my first year, I was at UConn, actually. I started off at UConn in stores. After my first year, that following summer, I went to Grenoble, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's like in the southeast, and it's a very mountainous region. It's, it has Beldon, Vercourt, and then Chartreuse, as it's like three main mountains. It's known as like a skiing village, and it's it's a little luxurious.
Okay.
So I went there it was not a long time. It was about a month, and I loved my host mom and my host family, and I'm still in touch with them, and it was a wonderful experience. And then I came back. I decided to leave UConn. I went to Mount Holyoke, and I decided to change my major to French because that experience I felt was so positive and so moving.
That's awesome.
And I got a firsthand experience of how really immersing yourself can open so many doors. And I felt, this is what I need to do. This is like really calling to me. And then my junior year, I did a full semester. And I did a full semester in a place called Montpellier, which is also very far south. And that was a very different experience to Grenoble. And that was the experience I kind of talked about in my paper, where I can picture this now, and I had just arrived. I have all my luggage in the back of the car, and my host mom is driving me back to our apartment. And, you know, I said, oh, I've been here before, and I love it here, and I wanted to study. I wanted to study here for an extended period, more than just a month, more than just 2 weeks, because I want to see, hey, do I want to live here? Because I really felt like that strongly, and you know, I really felt in a way French. And she looked at me and she said, I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, oh, well, why is that?
Yeah, right.
And because I was a bit taken aback. And
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, and she said, she heavily implied, you know, time has passed, so I can't give an exact quote.
Sure.
The implication was, you are not French. You are French Canadian. That's where you belong. And that it doesn't make sense for you to come to France because you're geographically closer to, you know, French Canada, and you are, if anything, you have more ties there than here in France. And it was a real blow.
Sure.
And I have to admit, when I was in France, I felt a little bitter, and I felt a bit slighted. Now, looking back and being a little more mature and, you know, having done my homework, right? I understand why she reacted the way she did. I do. And it was because, you know, our ancestors left right before there was a massive amount of change back in France. I mean, we weren't around for the revolution. We weren't around, you know, for either of the great wars, you know, the world wars. And, you know, there's a lot of history that we have missed back in France, that our ancestors have missed. And so they've continued to kind of go on their own path.
Of course. While
we have taken a diverging one. And so, yeah, logically, I probably do have more in common with my relatives up in, you know, Quebec and Montreal and than I would in France. But that was kind of an epiphany for me. And I felt like I really, at that point, turned to my heritage culture for some comfort. Also, because I felt a little bitter at the time, I did use a lot of like Quebecois words whenever I got the chance.
I gotcha. Sure.
All tiny little, you know, but also, like, more importantly, it was to practice, you know, my Quebecois French, my you know, I wanted to incorporate that. That was important to me. So that was an overview of my experience.
Oh yeah, okay. Something you wrote that I thought definitely got my attention, which is even now I wonder, what is a French Canadian? And obviously there's something that jumped out at me for sure, because it might be the question that underlies what this entire project I'm doing is about, might underlie what the heck I've been dedicating my life to for the last 2 years. So I'm just kind of worried. I'm not worried, but I'm curious how you came to that question. And is your thoughts on that question different now than it was, you know, even before you wrote this article, this essay?
You know, the thing about being French Canadian growing up is that there's not a lot of portrayals of French Canadians in American culture, right? And we see a lot of Italians, a lot of Irish,
Sure.
which is wonderful and great, but I didn't see a lot of like representation of myself or my family. And I kind of began asking, are we just a group of people that happen to speak French and we live on this continent, you know? And that didn't feel like a very pleasant thought or
Sure.
a satisfying
Yeah, it's
one.
got to be more
And
than
it
that,
didn't
right?
feel very comprehensive either. It kind of felt a bit dismissive. So I really thought about it. Like I gave it a lot of thought. And yeah, I think while I was reading David's piece, you know, A Distinct Alien Race, it kind of clicked. And especially when I was writing, because everything just happened to flow out of me. It really was very natural, which isn't something that happens to me a lot in my writing process. And for me, it was that we are very resilient. I kind of write my essay, we are a very stocky breed.
Yeah.
I think that I look to my mother and my father, and they are the hardest working people I've ever met in my entire life. And, you know, we were labeled as, David explains how a lot of French Canadians were only valued for their labor and for their tenacity and
Sure.
their ability to work, you know. And I think there's even a quote that he pulled from way back when, and someone was essentially saying that like a French Canadian employee doesn't care if you berate them or treat them poorly. They just, you know, they will keep working for you. They are like the prime employee. So, but I don't feel like our value is in being good employees. I think that our value is in being resourceful. I mean, this is a northern Canada with those kinds of winters. That is some very treacherous terrain.
Yeah,
That
for
is
sure.
brutal. The fact that, you know, the English were very determined to make French Canadians assimilate. And, you know, the fact that the KKK did harass French Canadians, I think that the fact that we are all still around is a testament to our strength. And so to me, in my opinion, being a French Canadian is to be a very resilient individual, to be a French speaker. I don't know, I think maybe to be adventurous a bit. That's my own opinion. My dad's a pilot, you know, he's a bit of a wanderer in that sense.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I've always had that kind of itch to go out and travel. And I think about the Coureurs de Bois, and they were pretty, yeah, I'd say a pretty adventurous bunch.
Tough dudes, for
A
sure.
lot, yeah, exactly, like very free spirited. That's what it means to me, I would say, and that's what I tried to express through my paper, although I'm not confident how much that came across.
No, your
But
paper's
that's my own personal take. Yeah, so that's what I would say, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you allude to what I think is probably a phony baloney narrative that I mean, we here in Manchester, obviously, it made its way down to Bristol. That, you know, Franco-Americans, really good workers. They don't,
Yeah.
They're never going to give you any trouble, but you definitely don't want to put them in a position of management because they can't handle that.
Right, exactly.
They're the ones who just, you know, punch the time clock and go home. That's the French Canadians. So the whole idea of why do you think then if the French was, because this is another question that I tackle all the time. Why do you think that if, you know, your grandparents all speaking French, why didn't they raise your folks?
Oh, that's definitely a case of assimilation. My own grandmother, you know, faced in Canada, she went to a bilingual school, my maternal grandmother. She went to a bilingual school in Canada.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, she told me about a story where she was in a class where, and I think the nun I think she was English speaking. She asked an English boy a question, and the English boy was supposed to answer back in French, but the English boy just couldn't think of the French words. My grandmother said the answer under her breath. And the nun kind of turned to her and said, "What was that?" And my grandmother, being the brave and feisty young woman she was, said it again.
Nice.
And she was physically punished for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet the sister wasn't very pleased with that.
No. And so even in a progressive school, they kind of incorporated pretty harsh punishment. And then my own mother, you know, she took a hard-covered dictionary to the face, essentially, from an English-speaking nun, as I wrote about in my paper, because French, you know, wasn't allowed. And then my own aunt, when her first language was French, and then she completely lost it because it was so looked down upon. My uncle, his last name is Gallipo, and he had to actually change it so that way his family would not be discriminated against. So
Sure.
it's been anglicized, which, yeah, in my opinion, is tragic and very wrong on so many levels. But assimilation is a very real and very violent thing. I think it is, I think probably to your average American, they may say, oh, assimilation is a good thing because then
Sure.
we're all kind of homogenous and we can get along and we have the same values, the same ideas, but that's not how it really works. And to say on the one hand that, oh, we are this cultural melting pot, and then to say, but you can't speak this foreign language because I don't know what you're saying. Those are two very conflicting ideologies there. And it's, you know, a bit of a paradox. What always happens with assimilation is there is always a deep sense of something lost and irrecoverable. And big part about my essay that I really wanted to convey, and the reason why I think it resonated with so many people, is that we all want to feel special and we all want to belong and we all want to feel like there is somewhere out there just for us that will always listen, that will always care, and that will always understand. But, you know, the French Canadian community is also very, I mean, on a global scale, it's quite small. Way back when the KKK was really up there and causing a ruckus, so to speak, you know, that wasn't how they were perceived as this unique cultural community. They were, as David Vermette writes, perceived as a bit of a threat.
Sure.
So yeah, that's my own take on assimilation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is because in Manchester here anyway, my parents actually went to a school, bilingual school, half English, half French, right in Manchester. They both spoke French in the house growing up, but never taught me and my sis, which again, obviously pretty disappointing in retrospect. But and we never had the KKK, at least to my knowledge, here in Manchester.
Right.
But even when something I was aware of growing up was that being French Canadian was almost synonymous with being low class.
Oh yes, definitely.
You were like the kids of the mill worker.
Yeah.
That's who you were. You're not something special. You're Canadian. So I cannot help but think that's a big reason why, in general, my generation here in Manchester does not have the language anymore, which is crazy. Yeah. And one thing you point to, which I thought was awesome, is when I talk about this, I use the word frustrated a lot. I feel very frustrated with a lot of things. You used angry, which I thought was very cool. You said you were angry. So what are you talking about? What makes you angry? Why are you angry? How did that get into your essay?
Because I had this image as I was writing, and I allude to this at the end, where there's a cabin full of like lumberjacks or filled with my forebears, and they're all waiting for me, and I walk in. I don't have to say a word, and there's just this immediate understanding between us. And as I write at the end, you know, and I don't want to get emotional, but I can't let the fantasy go beyond that, because I know that if I were to try to talk to them, I wouldn't be able to, or at least not in the way I want to. And that link to the past is potentially severed, you know, and it will always, for the rest of my entire life, be a fight to reclaim that and to rebuild that bridge. And when my grandparents are gone, there's nothing left. I mean, I won't be able to sit down with my grandmother and ask her to practice with me, you know. I won't be able to repair that link. And that makes me extremely sad, but it makes me livid because I just feel frankly very furious that wasn't nurtured, like that language, that our speaking in our language, it wasn't sheltered and protected and nurtured and allowed to grow and flourish. It was forcibly stomped out. The big part of my essay, I said, I want them to hear my case, and I want them to hear me and my story. And if it is too late for me, because this is written in English. And in my original essay, it's not included in the story, but I had written, perhaps I'm a dark omen of what could be. And what I meant by that is I had been talking to some French Canadians up in Quebec, and they expressed how when they see people like me in the States, French Canadian, but they can't speak French, they are frankly afraid and nervous, because
Absolutely.
that is a very real it's a very real possibility that their own children and grandchildren will not be able to speak French. And so looking at me and just hearing me, I am a reminder of the potential loss that they may experience, which is very painful. And obviously I don't take that to heart, but
no,
it is tragic in a way.
There are quite a few who look it's basically like a warning. Like, if they don't fight as hard as possible, this will be you. You're gonna turn into what these Franco-American guys are. That's
exactly.
But I do, in some respects, think that they underestimate the fact that a lot of us are still here. Like,
very true. Yeah.
We may not have the language, and I think, but the fight continues. I think, and at least in some respects, I feel like basically through this podcast, I got a bunch of friends now in Quebec. But one thing that at least has been passed on to me is that I think both of Franco-Americans and the Quebecois think that the war is over, but I think they're both wrong. I think the Americans think that the battle to hold on to French in Quebec is over and that the French won and that they're safe. And I think the Quebecois would suggest otherwise. And I think the Quebecois would think that the battle in the States is over and it's lost and it's gone.
Right.
And there's basically we're all just Americans now. And there's no difference between us and anybody else. And I don't think that's correct either. So it is pretty crazy. It is absolutely nuts. And maybe I wanted to ask, because obviously we got a blog and where we ask a ton of what I consider incredibly smart people. People who could dedicate their lives, their professional lives, especially in a lot of them, to absolutely anything. Like professors, writers, whatever. And they choose to dedicate it to the freaking conversation we're having right now. So what is it about, I mean, obviously I ask myself all the time, it's a huge part of my life. What is it about this conversation, this topic that really that is so impactful that you need to really make it a major part of your life?
The way I got into it was because I wanted to learn French. And to me, learning just another language is, 1, practical, 2, opens a lot of doors. But 3, it's a way to feel like you're home away from home in a way. I don't know how to explain that really, because French was not my first language. It's a way, it's a very comforting feeling. And to me, I'd say my fire and my drive and my interest in it comes from wanting to be connected to my family and to wanting to feel a sense of community and then preserving that. And I think that French being such a prominent part of our culture and our community is, just so essential. If I'm frank, I don't really have a great answer for that, but I think it's just, we all want to feel special, we all want to belong, and it's all something we share in common. We come from really different places, and our stories kind of overlap. Each one is pretty distinct, but it is comforting, and I think that that's what I take away from it. I don't know.
This has been a great conversation. I'm very, very glad you took the time to chat with us. I got to tell you, being completely real. I mean, most of the comments we get here on the podcast, social media and stuff, well, most of them, I'm not going to complain because most of them are very positive. But we do, time to time, Mike and I, we do get those negative comments, basically that we're phony baloney.
Mm-hmm.
We're not actually, we can't be calling ourselves French anything because we didn't grow up speaking the language. But when I come across your story and you're expressing how you feel angry or frustrated and that you decided to friggin' step up and do something about it, I thought was absolutely awesome, beyond motivating. I thought it was tremendous. Where can people, if you haven't seen it yet, we'll post it, but where can people find this article if they want?
Yeah, so it's online right now at Bangor Daily News. And I've been talking to Lisa Nishud.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. The one whose family is in St. Johnsbury Valley in Maine. She's the one.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
Lisa's freaking awesome.
Yeah, so she was going to also try to publish my piece.
In the forum.
Yes, that's it. And I think she might actually publish the original and full thing, although I would maybe like to tweak it a little bit. But yeah, so it should be the original edition is what she'll have.
That is so awesome. So now everybody needs to pick up the forum if you haven't before. Also because our blog series is featured in the forum, which makes it awesome. But thank you again for writing this article. Thank you again for coming on the podcast. I really, really hope you stay engaged because you're going to be a huge asset to us in the American community. It's really, really awesome to have your voice. So we appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.